You. Hello, everyone. I'm Emma, and I'm in Leeds in the UK. I just want to warn you all that I'm not an academic. I studied English at school till I was 18, but that was some time ago. I discovered Trollope much later in life, and I've been slowly working my way through his novels. I've now read a modest 23 of them. I'm one of the majority who voted for Barchester Towers in the Pick Up a Trollope vote, but I confess I felt a little ashamed because it was such an obvious choice. I rather hoped something else would win, maybe something I hadn't read yet to spur me on to a new book. Instead, I've found myself rereading Barchester Towers. I've read it maybe twice before and listened to it 3 or 4 times. And I would just like to put in a recommendation for Timothy West's narrated version on audio if anyone hasn't discovered it. He captures every nuance of Trollope's writing in his reading, and it's an absolute delight. So, despite my familiarity with the book, I'd forgotten just how damn good it is. I burst out laughing as I read Trollope's earnest assertion, "It is not my intention to breathe a word against the character of Mrs. Proudie." I saw that I'd previously underlined it and written "ha" in the margin. I do apologise for writing in books, but it is a cheap edition and will always be with me. So we start tonight's batch of 10 chapters in the middle of Mrs. Proudie's reception, with the wonderful farce of Bertie Stanhope, the sofa, and Mrs. Proudie's lace train. The picture of her shrieking, "Unhand it," 3 times fills me with mirth, and the incident is sandwiched between scenes in which the bishop is tormented by first Bertie and then Madeline Stanhope to great comic effect. But in the very next chapter, the smile is wiped off the reader's face, as our beloved Mr. Harding is belittled and humiliated by that supercilious Slope, and that's quite hard for me to say, in the very house where he used to be welcomed and loved. "New men are carrying out new measures and are carting away the useless rubbish of past centuries." Trollope portrays Mr. Harding's pain and bewilderment every bit as well as he painted the farcical scenes which preceded it. In her talk to the Society last week, Rowan Mateson argued against the idea that Trollope's books were safe and comfortable, and the writing in this chapter, which resonates with contemporary audiences as much as it must have done at the time, proves to me that they are certainly not comfortable. I started browsing Rowan's blog and was delighted to find she had talked about this very chapter. She wrote, and I'll quote, "Poor Mr. Harding. He just wants to be left alone to enjoy his quiet life and be a generally good person. Is that too much to ask?" And yet, in true Trollopian fashion, the answer is not as easy as we'd like, as Mr. Harding himself is sadly aware. Just because the old ways are comfortable does not mean they are right. And worse yet, just because Mr. Slope is the agent of change does not mean change is altogether wrong. If only. When Barchester Towers is not being extremely funny, it's often being surprisingly wise. Sometimes it's both at once. I quote that extensively because it just said what I wanted to say, but much better. Unfortunately, soon after his interview with Mr. Slope, Mr. Harding finds his beloved daughter actually defending the loathsome man. He confides his distress in Mrs. Grantley, his older daughter, who promptly runs away with the idea that Eleanor will become Mrs. Slope, and she soon fills her husband with the same dread. Meanwhile, however, the Archdeacon has summoned his friend Mr. Arabin from Oxford to Barchester to aid him in the forthcoming war against Proudieism in general, and Mr. Slope in particular. The Archdeacon is buoyed up by the thought of battles to come, and impervious to talk of dust carts and useless rubbish. He chivies the ex-warden to hold his ground and fight his corner. When Mr. Harding protests, "I doubt there is any true courage in squabbling for money," the Archdeacon responds with wonderful Trollopian down-to-earthness. "If honest men did not squabble for money in this wicked world of ours, the dishonest men would get it all, and I do not see that the cause of virtue would be much improved." Chapter 15, The Widow's Suitors, is a masterful set piece. First, Mr. Slope finds out that Eleanor has a tidy fortune and is excellent wife material. Then Charlotte Stanhope determines that the only way for Bertie to get anywhere in life is to marry Eleanor and make her fortune his own. Trollope inserts an extended and brilliant passage in the authorial voice, assuring the reader that neither alliance will come about, and defending himself against accusations of what would come to be known as spoiling. Now we see the two suitors start to ingratiate themselves with Eleanor. Mr. Slope comes upon her when she is playing and laughing with her baby, setting the scene for his horribly inappropriate letter later on. I'm thinking of long silken tresses. Bertie plays a much wiser game, as Eleanor enjoys the rare company of cheerful, friendly people near her own age. We are told the Stanhopes are heartless and unprincipled, and they are, but their moonlit ramble through Barchester sounds much more fun than an evening at the Archdeacon's. Over the next two chapters, Mr. Slope begins to turn against his former mentor, Mrs. Proudie, undermining her wish to see Mr. Quiverful installed in the hospital, a complete U-turn on his former position. It is a delight to watch him begin to forge an alliance with the pusillanimous bishop. For UK participants, his words eerily foreshadow recent events in Downing Street. "Ah, my lord, we shall all be in scrapes if the ladies interfere." The bishop creeps between his two masters, trying to pacify both, the epitome of weakness. In chapter 20, Mr. Arabin is introduced, and under the radar, an unnamed Cornish vicar, whom we may meet again. The detail into which Trollope goes over Arabin's adherence to Newman and the Oxford movement I found fascinating, and the enthusiasm with which young English clergymen took up this trend foreshadows the social media contagion we see today, though maybe Mr. Arabin thought more deeply about his path than the average anti-vaxxer or tearer down of statues. I thought these were 10 wonderful chapters, a thoroughly enjoyable blend of pathos and humour, with some classic examples of Trollope's authorial interventions, which I rather miss in his later works. I look forward to hearing your thoughts.